Brothers and sisters, I stand before you tonight not to entertain, not to comfort, not to ease your minds, but to wake them up, because we are living in a world that's on fire, a world where the oppressed are told to love their oppressors, where the exploited are told to thank their exploiters, and where the truth is buried under a mountain of lies dressed up to look like peace, progress, and democracy. But make no mistake, that peace is a chain, that progress is a mask, that democracy is a game rigged from the very beginning. Now let me tell you what they don't want you to hear. They don't want you to know that there's a system, a global system, that feeds on the backs of poor people, brown people, black people, and those who dare to speak out. It is a system that has dressed itself up in the language of liberty, but it operates in the shadows of tyranny. It bombs villages by day and signs peace treaties by night. It floods our communities with poison and then builds private prisons to lock up the survivors. It tells you your enemy is your neighbor while it robs you both behind your backs. They want you to keep your eyes closed, your mouth shut, and your fists down, because they know that once you see the truth, once you recognize who's really pulling the strings, you will stop blaming each other and start uniting against the real enemy. Now some folks out there say, why be so harsh? Why speak with fire in your voice? Because we are being buried quietly, because silence has never saved a people, because polite suffering is still suffering, and I will not dress it up to make it easier for our oppressors to digest. You have been told to wait for change. You have been told to vote for change. You have been told to pray for change. But I say, change only comes when you demand it, not with petitions, but with pressure, not with handshakes, but with hands joined together, refusing to be broken. The problem is not just in our streets. It's in their boardrooms. It's in their banks. It's in their foreign policies. It's in their weapons shipments, their backroom deals, their school curriculums, and their media headlines. The problem is not one man. The problem is not one law. The problem is a structure, a cancer, and unless we are ready to cut it out by the root, it will grow back stronger every time. They tell you to love your enemies, but they never teach your enemies to stop hating you. They tell you to forgive, but they don't stop the crimes. They want your patience while they profit, your obedience while they occupy, your prayers while they pollute the earth, drain your resources, and lock away your future. So this is not a message of hate. It is a message of clarity. If a man is drowning and you calmly explain the science of water, you've murdered him with your civility. When your house is burning and someone tells you to relax while they finish their coffee, that is not love. That is betrayal. The system we live under today is not one that simply mismanages or occasionally stumbles. It is a system carefully designed, intentionally structured to maintain control over the many by the few. It does not make mistakes when it exploits the poor. It does not accidentally harm the oppressed. What it does is by design. What it hides is not oversight, but strategy. And what it promotes is freedom, as progress, as peace. These are the tools of deception it uses to keep the people blind, distracted, and docile. When they speak of democracy, they show you the ballot, but never the hands that count it. When they speak of opportunity, they show you the success of a few, but never the chains around the rest. When they speak of peace, they mean the kind of peace that comes when all resistance is crushed and every voice of truth is silenced. The disguise is part of the weapon. The appearance of liberty is more effective than open dictatorship because it makes people believe they are in control. The system wraps itself in flags, sings songs of unity, broadcasts messages of hope, all while it exploits, divides, and dominates. It tells you to be proud of your nation, even as your nation makes war on the poor, both at home and abroad. It tells you that justice is blind while its courts are sharp-eyed when it comes to skin color, class, and descent. It tells you that hard work is the path to wealth, while the wealthiest never lifted a hand in labor. It sells you the image of equality while feeding from the deep wells of historical injustice. But none of this can work unless the people believe it. And that's where the real genius of the system lies, in its ability to convince the oppressed that they are free, to convince the exploited that they are just unlucky, to convince the marginalized that their condition is their own fault. That is the cruel brilliance of modern oppression. It makes its victims blame themselves. So the system floods our communities with violence, poor education, and then steps back and asks, what's wrong with you? It writes policies that impoverish, then holds up a mirror and says, you did this. And if you dare to resist, they call you ungrateful. If you speak up, they call you dangerous. If you fight back, they call you a criminal. But when they bomb nations, install dictators, steal resources, manipulate elections, incarcerate millions, that's called order, that's called strategy, that's called progress. This is how the system sustains itself, not only through violence, but through illusion, through distraction, through division. It trains people to argue over crumbs, to hate each other over minor differences, while the real looters sit untouched in their offices and boardrooms. It uses race, religion, language, nationality, whatever it can, to keep the people from uniting. Because if the people were to ever look past those labels and see the hand that holds all the strings, the system would collapse under the weight of its own lies. So it must keep us fighting among ourselves. It must keep us busy with manufactured threats and artificial enemies. They distract you with elections that change nothing. They distract you with scandals that affect no policy. They distract you with celebrities, sports, gadgets, endless news cycles, all to keep you from asking the one question that could unravel everything: who benefits from this? And the answer again and again is not you, not your family, not your community, but the same few at the top who have always profited from the suffering of the many. These people don't care what flag you wave. They don't care what God you pray to. They care about power, and they will sell you any story to keep it. You're told the system is fair, and yet it was built on stolen land, with stolen labor, through stolen lives. You're told to be proud of institutions that have never once served your people. You're told the system is evolving, that we're making progress, that things are getting better. But better for whom? For every new right they grant with one hand, they take 10 with the other. For every door they open, they build 10 more walls. For every law they pass that seems to protect you, they enforce it in ways that hurt you. And even when they make symbolic gestures, rename a street, elect a token, apologize for past sins, it is always done to preserve the system, not to dismantle it. This is why we must stop mistaking symbols for substance. A black president does not mean the end of racism. A female CEO does not mean equality. A rainbow flag on a corporation does not mean justice. These are decorations meant to pacify, not liberate. The system will let a few of us rise just high enough to keep the rest of us quiet. That is not progress. That is manipulation. True progress would be the end of exploitation, not its rebranding. True progress would be power in the hands of the people, not the illusion of choice. You cannot reform something that is designed to work against you. You cannot negotiate with a machine that survives on your silence. And you certainly cannot expect justice from a structure that profits off your suffering. The first step to freedom is recognizing that the enemy is not just one politician, not just one policy, not just one nation. It is a system that has covered the world with its reach, and whose greatest weapon is the lie that it does not exist. So long as we keep believing the fairy tale, we will keep losing our future. So long as we keep trusting in their promises, we will keep bleeding under their feet, because this system does not sleep. It does not slow down. It adapts. It evolves. It deceives. Real change does not arrive on its own. It does not come gift wrapped in political speeches or handed down gently from the balconies of the powerful. Real change is not granted. It is seized. It is demanded. It is forced into existence by the courage of the oppressed, by the unity of the unheard, and by the fire of those who have nothing left to lose. For too long, people have been trained to wait for the next election, for the next leader, for the next policy, to wait and believe that someday justice will trickle down like rain from the sky. But rain does not fall where the clouds have been stolen. And justice does not trickle from systems built to contain and control the very people they claim to serve. They tell you to be patient, to be civil, to go through the proper channels, as if those channels weren't designed like mazes to exhaust you. They want you to believe that petitions and slogans are enough, that begging for rights is the same thing as securing them. But history has never moved forward on politeness. Oppressors don't respond to whispers. They respond to force, not just physical, but moral, spiritual, and collective. Not a force of chaos, but a force of will, an unbreakable insistence that says we will not live like this any longer. It is dangerous to confuse the illusion of change with actual liberation. It is dangerous to think that laws passed by the same hands that once enslaved can be trusted to deliver freedom. It is dangerous to place faith in a system that survives off the very injustice it claims to fight. No master gives up power because it's the right thing to do. No empire ends itself out of guilt. What has ever been taken from the people has been reclaimed only when the people stood together and said no more. And the louder that voice, the clearer that refusal, the more the walls begin to crack. But they have taught you to fear your own power. They have taught you to believe that resistance is violence, that disobedience is disorder, that rage is something to be ashamed of. They fear your anger because they know it is righteous. They fear your unity because they know it is unstoppable. So they scatter you with distractions, divide you with identity, exhaust you with small victories, and confuse you with endless debates that lead nowhere. While you are arguing over the words, they are writing the rules. While you are begging for recognition, they are expanding their control. While you are waiting, they are winning. You've been told to change the world by asking nicely. But the world doesn't change when people ask nicely. It changes when people demand justice and refuse to back down. Change happens when people organize, when they unify, when they strike, when they march, when they disrupt the comfort of the powerful until that power bends or breaks. The ones in power want peace, not because they love harmony, but because peace means profit. Peace means stability for their banks, their markets, their interests. So long as you do not shake that peace, they do not listen. Revolutions are not born from silence. They are not born from good manners. They are born from fire, from necessity, from the realization that there is no other path left. When your back is against the wall, when every door has been locked, when every voice has been ignored, there comes a time when the only answer left is resistance. Not resistance for the sake of chaos, but resistance for survival, resistance for dignity, resistance because submission is no longer an option. And yet, many people are still afraid, not because they don't see the problem, but because they've been taught to fear the solution. They've been taught that resistance is reckless, that confrontation is dangerous. They've been conditioned to believe that if they just wait a little longer, things will get better on their own. But the world does not reward passivity. The world rewards those who take what they need, who organize and act, who speak and move and risk. Every right you have today was bought with struggle. Every freedom was purchased through sacrifice. No amount of waiting ever stopped a boot from stepping on a neck. And don't be fooled into thinking your one voice isn't enough. Your voice becomes enough when it joins with others. Your presence becomes enough when it disrupts the normal. Your refusal becomes enough when it exposes the lie that obedience is peace. The greatest weapon the oppressed have is their unity, and that unity becomes unbearable for the system once it wakes up to its own power. When workers stop working, when students stop accepting lies, when communities stop cooperating with their own oppression, the system trembles. It doesn't take everyone. It takes enough people deciding that survival with dignity is more important than comfort without freedom. Change is not measured in applause. It is not certified by pundits or approved by politicians. Change is what happens when the people move faster than the system can control. When demands become so loud, so widespread, so undeniable that the very institutions built to suppress them begin to crack under the pressure. Change is not a handshake. Change is a storm. And it starts with one truth spoken loud, then echoed by millions until the walls can't contain it. The oppressor's greatest fear is not your rage. It is your organization. It is when your anger becomes focused, when your resistance becomes strategic, when your struggle becomes collective. Because then you become ungovernable. You become unpredictable. You become a force that cannot be bought off, cannot be silenced, and will not go away. That is how real change begins, not in the halls of power, but in the streets, in the homes, in the classrooms, in the minds of those who decide that they will no longer participate in their own destruction. The problem we face is not isolated to one corner of the world, nor is it confined to a single issue or injustice. It is structural, it is global, and it has been built, maintained, and refined by the very forces that pretend to be our saviors. This system is not broken. It is functioning exactly as it was designed to function. It exploits because it was created to exploit. It divides because it was crafted to divide. It dominates because domination is its foundation. It is a structure rooted in centuries of conquest, of colonization, of capitalist greed and imperial violence, and it has adapted through every generation to remain powerful, profitable, and protected. This system sits like a shadow over every nation. It changes its face depending on where you stand, but its hand is always the same. In one place it wears the mask of democracy, in another the iron fist of dictatorship. In one land it claims to bring civilization, in another it pretends to restore order. But no matter what flag it waves or what anthem it sings, it speaks the same language: control. The same banks fund the wars. The same corporations write the laws. The same interests manipulate markets, overthrow governments, silence journalists, imprison dissidents, and flood the media with narratives designed to maintain the illusion that freedom exists. It is global because its interests are global. It cannot afford borders when it seeks to own the whole earth. It does not stop at one people, one race, one nation. It feeds on anyone it can exploit, and it will shift its target the moment one group becomes too difficult to contain. That is why unity among the oppressed is its greatest threat. It survives only when we believe that our struggles are separate. It survives when the worker in one country blames the immigrant, when the poor man blames the refugee, when the native blames the stranger. It survives by planting fear where there should be solidarity, suspicion where there should be strength. The media that pretends to inform you is part of the structure. The education system that trains you to obey is part of the structure. The police that patrol your neighborhoods, the military that invades foreign nations, the corporations that shape your economy, the banks that control your livelihood. These are not separate entities. They are limbs of the same beast, and they move in coordination, serving the same goal: to preserve the system that feeds them. You may think that your vote, your opinion, your individual voice can alter this machine, but they have already calculated your participation into the equation. They do not fear your choice. They fear your rejection of the whole illusion. And that's why, when someone begins to question the structure, not just the parts of it, not just the politicians or policies, but the very root of its existence, that person becomes dangerous. They are not hated because they lie. They are hated because they tell the truth too clearly, too loudly, and with too much courage. Truth in a world built on lies is a revolutionary act. It shakes the foundation. It reveals the machinery. It makes people look at what they were never supposed to see. The system cannot afford to let people believe that there is another way to live. That is why history is rewritten. That is why resistance is criminalized. That is why dissent is painted as treason or terrorism. Because if enough people began to understand that their poverty is not an accident, that their suffering is not their fault, that their oppression is not a result of their choices but a result of design, then the system begins to crack. If enough people realize that their enemies are not the ones who look different, but the ones who profit from division, then the fire starts to spread. What they don't want you to know is that every major institution you encounter, from school to work to law to media, has been shaped to mold you into a compliant piece of the machine. They teach you facts, but not truth. They give you knowledge, but not understanding. They offer you survival, but not freedom. The curriculum is designed to make you productive, not powerful. The jobs are designed to keep you busy, not fulfilled. The laws are designed to regulate you, not protect you. It is not about justice. It is about order. And order in this context means your submission to a structure that never had your interest at heart. When the people rise in one part of the world, they are crushed with bullets. When they rise in another, they are silenced with propaganda. Elsewhere, they are bought off with temporary comfort, distracted with luxury, pacified with entertainment. But the goal is always the same, to prevent the spread of awareness. Because when awareness spreads, resistance follows. And when resistance grows, the structure begins to tremble. There are those who believe that the system can be repaired, that if we just elect the right leaders, pass the right reforms, tweak the policies, everything will change. But how can you fix something that was built to break you? How do you repair a prison and call it a home? How do you decorate your cell and call it freedom? The structure is not flawed, it is faithful to its purpose. And that purpose is to concentrate wealth, to protect power, and to maintain control. It is global because it operates beyond borders. The laws that limit you do not limit it. The debts that weigh down your communities enrich it. The violence that shatters your nation strengthens it. It moves through trade deals, international banks, shadowy intelligence networks, and multinational corporations that owe no loyalty to any land but power itself. It can starve millions with the stroke of a pen. It can topple governments without a single soldier. And it can convince you to thank it for your oppression. That is the depth of the problem. It is not surface. It is not simple. It is not accidental. It is a structure that survives because it adapts. It doesn't just use force. It uses narrative. It doesn't just use prisons. It uses culture. It doesn't just use laws. It uses fear. And it has lasted because too many have believed that their suffering was isolated, when in fact it is universal. The same hand that tightens around one people's throat reaches into every corner of the earth. And unless we recognize that common enemy and name that structure for what it is, we will continue to fight shadows while the real power remains untouched. Silence and civility in the face of injustice are not virtues. They are forms of betrayal. When the world is burning and you whisper for calm, you are not a peacemaker. You are a participant in the destruction. When human beings are being crushed beneath the weight of an oppressive system and you urge them to be patient, you are standing with the oppressor, not the oppressed. This is the uncomfortable truth that those in power do not want spoken. They want you quiet. They want you respectable. They want you polite while they poison your water, bankrupt your schools, militarize your neighborhoods, and sell your future to the highest bidder. They want you calm while they profit from your compliance. They want you civil while they commit uncivilized acts of greed and violence on a scale too large for the average citizen to fully grasp. Civility has been weaponized. It has become the favorite tool of the ruling class to disarm the people, to tame their outrage, to redirect their fury into channels that lead nowhere. Don't shout, they say. Don't protest like that. Don't block traffic. Don't disturb the peace. But there is no peace to disturb when people are dying in silence, when communities are rotting from intentional neglect, when justice is reserved only for the wealthy and well-connected. What they call peace is the sound of suffering going unheard. What they call order is the smooth functioning of a machine that grinds human lives into dust. They fear the voice of the oppressed, not because it is violent, but because it is honest. Silence, in these times, is not neutrality. Silence is complicity. To be silent when you know the truth is to side with the lie. To be civil when your people are being imprisoned, brutalized, robbed, erased. That is not nobility. That is surrender. You may not wear the uniform of the enforcer, but if you say nothing while your neighbors are caged and killed, You serve the same system. And that system survives not only by the hands that carry out its violence, but by the millions of silent witnesses who let it happen in peace. They want you to believe that raising your voice is radical, that protesting injustice is dangerous, that expressing your rage is inappropriate. But there is nothing more dangerous than injustice itself. There is nothing more inappropriate than pretending everything is fine when the foundations of this world are built on blood. They fear your voice not because it is wrong, but because it might wake someone else up. Because truth is contagious. Because anger is contagious. Because once people understand that their pain is not personal but political, once they connect the dots and see the system behind their suffering, they begin to move differently. They begin to speak. They begin to organize. They begin to fight back. And so every time a voice rises, the system responds. It mocks. It shames. It dismisses. It criminalizes. It finds ways to discredit the speaker instead of addressing the truth. It tells you that you're being too emotional, too extreme, too loud, too disruptive. But disruption is not the problem. Injustice is the problem. Disruption is the response to a world that refuses to hear cries for help, that ignores the polite requests, that spits on petitions, that delays reforms until the grave is already filled. They are not afraid of chaos. They are afraid of clarity. They are afraid of the moment when enough people stop accepting the unacceptable and start making demands that threaten the balance of their power. Civility in the hands of the oppressor is a leash. It is a way to control the pace of your protest. It is a tool to decide how you are allowed to respond to the theft of your life, your labor, your dignity. But no one gets to set terms for your liberation. No one who profits from your oppression has the right to tell you how to resist it. Respectability will not save you. Quiet suffering will not earn you justice. There is no award for dying politely. There is no freedom for those who obey every unjust rule and hope that the system will suddenly grow a conscience. History did not change because people were quiet. Progress did not come because people were nice. It came when they were loud, when they were unruly, when they were unwilling to wait any longer. Every right you enjoy today was fought for by those who were called radicals, agitators, extremists. And if they had followed the rules, if they had waited for permission, if they had cared more about being liked than being free, we would still be in chains, literal or otherwise. They were hated in their time because they told the truth too directly, because they refused to play the game, because they loved justice more than comfort. This system does not fear your prayers. It fears your power. It does not fear your sorrow. It fears your action. It will tolerate your tears, your mourning, your internal suffering. So long as you keep it private, so long as you do not disrupt, so long as you do not make the comfortable feel uncomfortable. But the moment you turn your grief into movement, your pain into protest, your silence into speech, that is the moment they sound the alarm. That is the moment you become a problem. And that is the moment you start becoming free. There will always be those who tell you to be quiet, who urge you not to rock the boat, who caution you to wait for the right time, the right language, the right process. But ask yourself, when has the right time ever come? When has the system ever changed because it was politely asked to do so? How long must people suffer before the world decides it is finally okay to listen to them? If your words are uncomfortable, it is because the truth is uncomfortable. If your voice shakes the room, it is because the room was built on lies. And if your fury makes people uneasy, it is because they have grown too comfortable with the very things that should outrage them. You are not wrong to raise your voice. You are not wrong to be angry. You are not wrong to refuse silence. You are not wrong to demand a world that does not trample you, and then ask you to thank it for the privilege. The world has always moved forward because of those who dared to speak when it was dangerous, who dared to act when it was forbidden, who dared to live free in a world built to break them.